In the name of Allah, the Rahman, the Rahim, dear students and viewers, welcome you all in today's lecture. Topic for today's lecture discussion is properties of communication. As we are having properties of language, for example, productivity is there, reflexivity is there, cultural transmission, displacement is there. So, in the same way, we are having properties of communication. There are 8 properties of communication. The first one is communication is process or processual. Communication is dynamic in nature. Communication is interactive and transactive. Communication is symbolic. Communication is intentional, contextual, ubiquitous, and cultural. So all these properties we will be able to explain these properties through certain statements. Like for example, the first statement is communication is a process. So it means that we can't talk about the beginning, the proper start of the communication because it's ongoing, ever-changing process. So communication is a process, ongoing process. We are having like no model to explain that how communication is a process. Again, communication is a transaction among symbol users in which meanings are dynamic. Yes, meanings are dynamic. Like for example, we are having many stages of communication. So the first property, that is communication is process, and another is communication is dynamic. These two properties are interrelated. Like communication is dynamic by nature, so it's ongoing process, it's a dynamic process. Like we can't talk about the start, the middle, and the end of the communication, but it's ongoing process, it is dynamic in nature. Having like we are having changes in communication process of interaction. So no model is available to assess that communication is such and such, communication is so and so. So we can just say that communication is process, but that process is very dynamic. Changes occur in communication. The third one, that is communication occurs when two or more people interact through the exchange of messages. So it means that communication is interactive and transactive. Like interactive functions of language or communications are there, and transactive function, like for example, we are having interaction just to have a repo, just to have a relationship with others. For relation building we are having communication, and for business purposes we are having communication. So basically these two, like communication is transactive or interactive. Communication is interactive just for interaction. So in this case communication will be one-sided, like one-way traffic. Like just we will convey our ideas to other. When there is response from others, from other participants, when there is feedback from other participants, like we have communication, we have communicated our ideas, conveyed our ideas to others. So that is just interaction. When there is response from them, there is reply or feedback from them, when they understand our message, and they are having like answers for our questions, for our queries. So in this case communication will be transactive. So we can say that, then we can say that communication is a two-way traffic. Okay, so communication is for transaction purpose, for business purpose, for repo development. So when we are having repo relations building, so that would be communication is interactive. If we are having business purposes behind our communication, so in this case we will say that communication is transactive. Communication is symbolic, like all the symbols of the mind together with the means of conveying them through space, and like we are using symbols, signs are used. In those signs we are having intentions. Okay, like for example, according to Sasso, that is two types of signs are there: signified and signifier. signified the meanings of the symbols, the intentions we are conveying through symbols, like words and meanings of words. So these words are signifier, and the meanings of those words are, we will say that, signified. Okay, word and meanings, pictures and meanings. So symbols are used for communication, or in communication or interaction we are using words, symbols, gestures. So behind these words we are having intentions in our mind. So that's why we are saying that communication is symbolic in nature. Communication is like, we can say that communication is intentional. We are having intentions when we are conveying our messages. We are having some ideas, some thoughts will be there, and those thoughts will be conveyed through symbols, words, forms, pictures, images. Communication is like contextual. In context we are having communication. Okay, in certain context, like with the variation of contexts, there comes changes in meanings in communication. So communication is contextual in certain contexts. That context can be like linguistic context, context. It can be like very physical context. It can be like imaginary context. It can be implicit or explicit context. So there are many. It can be historical context as well. So communication is taking place always inside the context. Without context we can't talk about communication. Context is like obligatory for communication. And then the last one, very important, according to Edward T. Hall, cultural anthropologist, 1959, he is saying that culture is communication and communication is culture. Culture is communication and communication is culture. Like they are interrelated. We can't separate culture from communication and communication from language. But we can say that culture is very broad term. After culture we are having communication, and then we are having language. So between culture and language we are having communication. Communication is smaller than culture, and communication is broader than language. Okay, so what's meant by communication is culture and culture is communication. Like through certain acts, we are communicating our ideas, our thoughts, messages to others. So these acts, like the act of shaking of hands, okay. So this is in our culture, that firstly early in the morning we are having shaking of hands with other participants, with other friends, or with other colleagues, or with students. So this shaking of hand is in our culture. But when we are like doing that very act, which is the part of our culture, but we are having communication as well. Like another example from other cultures, like for example they are having kissing. So early in the morning at first meeting, uh, they are kissing one another in certain cultures. So kissing is a part of their culture, but through the act of that kissing, they are also communicating. Okay, so that's why they are saying that Edward T. Hall is saying that culture is communication and communication is culture. We can't separate culture from language or culture from communication. We are seeing that when communication is going on, so there will be the reflection of culture. Okay, and when there is the sharing of a culture or assimilation of culture, so there will be communication. Through communication we are promoting cultures, we are having the knowledge or awareness of cultures, of many cultures, of cross culture, of like super culture, subcultures. So these all things will be conveyed or explained or interpreted through communication. So that's why when language is spoken, culture is reflected, or we can say that language carries the burden of culture, or communication carries the burden of culture. Thank you.